Welcome to the Leadership Journal with your hosts, Nick Helgett and Robbie Woodard,
where we cover our journey, struggles, and obstacles that we have overcome, and moments in our careers that have led to growth. Here on Table Talk each week, where we break down various topics and journals of our trials and tribulations. Okay, and now we're recording.
All right, we're here for the Leadership Journey with your hosts, Nick Helgett and Robbie Woodard.
And we've got a special guest with us today. We got Jed Stoltz here with us. He's a senior leader. He's got some experience in leading people, and I'm looking forward to having your insights in this conversation, Jed.
Oh, thanks for having me on the podcast.
So this is a topic that Nick absolutely loves, and it's something that he really wanted to talk about tonight. And I wanted to add a couple of things to it as well, but I'm going to let him kind of guide us through his thought process.
So, with my previous experiences we talked about last time of, working in a distribution environment, that environment was a heavily micromanaged environment. Anywhere down to standing at the end of an aisle and watching somebody work, So there's a word that's tossed around all the time, as leaders, we need to engage our team, leader engagement. And at that time, as I started my journey, leader engagement didn't make a lot of sense to me. I thought I knew what it meant, but the more the more senior leaders I talked to, the more buy-in I try to get for promotion and stuff like that, the more I realized I didn't really fully understand what it meant. But I definitely learned micromanagement very quickly. So when I became a lead, in my first true leadership position, just rather than being a peer leader, I chose to get to know the people on the floor. Most people, because I had been in merit positions and different positions that I was much less seen, being in logistics and those kinds of roles. People on the floor just don't see those people because they're out in a different building. They're not in the main warehouse. So, so being a peer leader is very different from being in a leadership position, even though there's some ground rules you kind of learn along the way and lessons learned along the way. But so I chose to just start getting to know the people on the floor, introducing myself, finding out what made them tick. And that's truly the basis of engagement. Getting to know somebody, engaging, figuring out what they might be struggling with that is within their job description that you can help them improve on. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that goes onto a personal level, and leader engagement can go the other way real quick, to where it's hard to discipline somebody because you've created too much of a relationship with them. And we can talk a little bit more about that later, but I'll let you.
Like for me, my journey, like we talked about in episode 0, starting off not having any guiding rails or any kind of push off into here's how you lead people. I was shown here's how you manage somebody by your position. And that culture was very strong with the leaders that I had been brought up with, and then brought into the world through when I just wanted to experience leading somebody. And micromanagement habits, once you learn them, are very hard to get away from. And I only say that because when you've built the habit, changing your habits or learning a new habit, you have to do two things at the same time. You have to invest in the new habit as much as you have to invest in unlearning the previous habit. And once they're ingrained in you, once their reactions, once their initial thought processes, your bias kicks in, your ability to stray towards one reason over another makes it very difficult. So micromanagement is hard to go away from when that's what you're taught. And it's frustrating.
Yeah. I might also add, micromanagement is undeniably effective in the short term for a lot of new leaders and for a lot of companies. And so when you have a leader or a manager who is looking mostly at short-term results, they want something today, they want something tomorrow, they want results now, they can often push you down that path of micromanaging because they need those results. And And so once you've learned that pattern, like you said, it's really difficult to get out of, especially if you're in a position where you're being pushed for results. It's an easy thing to default back to because you need to make a change now. You need to get those numbers. You need to get something done. And it's just not going the way that you think it should or that you'd like it to. It's easy to default back to that micromanagement habit because in the short term, it is an easy way to get quick results.
Well, and what it does on the same side is it breeds toxicity.
Absolutely.
Animosity, fuel for hate, for regret, for not being empowered to be successful. You're not breeding a team environment. You're breeding you're power hungry performers.
Yeah, absolutely. I should say I'm not advocating for micromanagement.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, I know. I get you. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not trying to advocate for micromanagement.
but you're 100% right. It drives results very quickly.
It does. And I think that's why that's another reason that it can be so hard to break because, like you said, you have to devote that effort as much to not being a micromanager and as well as being a better leader. But when you're under pressure, it's easy to default back to those old habits that you've learned.
Well, and like we're going to be talking about when it comes to engagement, relationships on certain levels, on certain aspects, require you to not lead with fear, which is what micromanagement is all about, is leading by, hey, I need this now. Pressure,
right?
Toxicity, needing to perform. But if you build the culture of teamwork, of people working together, by leading by example or leading through others, you don't need the short-term results because what you invest, you get back tenfold.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get the leaders that have been in the industry for so long to see that because they just think of tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of want to, for anybody listening that's, maybe in an hourly position and they're aspiring to want to move to that next level, or they're going to school for their business degree or whatever it is, and they're trying to get into management. I think it's really important to define those terms because not like I said, when I was as an hourly person, I didn't truly understand what engagement meant. And so, what I have written down as a definition, and we can dive into this a little bit further, Robbie, if you want to, but leader engagement is a leadership approach that involves motivating, inspiring, and involving team members in decision making. So, in my current at my current company, we talk a lot about decision rights and empowering people to be able to make those decision rights within the job that they're doing. So that if something happens, they make a decision. A leader is their leader or their supervisor is in a meeting or something, and they don't have somebody that they can right there say, hey, can I bounce this off you? Empowering them to make that decision, and then coming back and saying, well, and then being able to explain it, why they made that decision. Then you can say, well, I totally understand that, but here's what the result we were looking for, or like, hey, that was a great decision based on what you had at the time. Awesome job. It could go either way. But empowering people and letting them know that you trust them to make a decision and that it's okay if they fail. And that safe place to safe. How did you word it earlier?
Just having
failing safely.
Just have a place to fail safely. Exactly.
Yeah.
One, like what we had also talked about before recording is, well, when you think of failing safely, if you are a micromanagement leader, you put someone into a space that's got confined constraints, it's got limits on what they can and cannot do, and there's no freedom of thought, there's no freedom of creativity in any kind of problem-solving manner. And when you're empowering someone to succeed, you're essentially putting somebody out to a pasture and saying, okay, you're going to come up with your own limits, your own constraints. You're going to figure out what fails, what succeeds, and you're going to tell me how big to build the box or how big to build the pen. So we know how to replicate and then maybe improve, but not like you have a limited scope. No, you have as much scope as you need, but you have to figure it out.
Yeah. And, I think a really great example of that I've experienced in my own leadership journey is I have a leader in my current role, or he was a leader in my current role, but has moved on to a different role who gave me a project a little while ago to fix an issue that we were having with materials. And I won't get into the details, but what he told me was, hey, we clearly have an issue here with traceability and other things. So let's fix it. Let's make this better. You don't have to ask me for permission. You don't have to run things by me. Just look at it, take this other person as a partner, look at this together, figure out a solution and implement it. That was all he wanted.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if
he empowered me to find what the issues were, come up with solutions as a team, working with another partner who was also involved in that process, and then to come up with a solution that would work well, and then just implement it without having to get permission, without having to have him hold my hand. I wasn't in that environment like you talked about, that sandbox where I have no decision rights, I have no choices. Just, here's some things, go do this. He said, here's a problem, fix it.
Yeah. And so that leads me to define micromanagement. A management style characterized by excessive control and attention to minor details, often leading to a lack of autonomy for team members. It's long-term micromanagement can kill someone's motivation to go above and beyond to not only be successful themselves, but help the company be successful and be that high contributing team member. And when I say high contributing, that doesn't always mean, they've got super high production. They're contributing by teaching the next generation of employees. They're contributing by, mentoring people that, have been there for a while, or, making suggestions to tenured team members that, hey, I just noticed this. Can I show you something I just learned? And, they're invested in making things work long term.
Well, and look at it this way too. When you have a leader that micromanages or leads by long-term micromanagement, for those that are listening, just think of a leader that sticks out to you as someone who is a micromanager, who has micromanager tendencies. Are they exhausted? Are they fatigued? Are they stressed out? What's their anxiety like? Do they engage with people? Are they just someone that's there and they say, get this done, but then they watch you the whole way? Or are they actually an engaging leader that is happy, that wants to be there, that wants you to be there, wants you to be part of the team?
I do want to defend, though, a little bit previous leaders that I had at my previous employer, in the sense that in a distribution environment, being a cost center, everything is the environment is inherently under a microscope. Everything is a cost. The more touches on a box, it drives the cost of that carton up. Like, there's so many metrics involved that it's got to be stressful. And then it almost pushes you in a direction, because it's a high stress environment, to micromanage, whether you like it or not. Now that goes too far, but I think I want to defend the stress behind that, right? The pressure behind that to produce.
I will say though, part of engagement, as a leader also means getting your team engaged with the business.
Yeah.
And I think having some transparency about what it is that you are seeing as a leader, what we talk about in our meetings, things like that is key for the people that you're leading. They need to understand why you're asking the things that you're asking, or maybe why you're focusing on some of the things that you're focusing on, because the why really matters, right?
Yes,
and getting that buy-in from the team to fix those metrics long term requires more than micromanaging, more than, like you said earlier, sitting at the end of an aisle watching somebody work so you can critique every little thing that they do to try to improve their performance. Instead of doing that, help them understand why these things matter, and why how it impacts the business, how that impacts them, and give them that ownership over what they do and how they impact the business to make a positive change.
Well, and ultimately what I think that is going to be simple to talk about in detail later on is stuff like Gemba, Lean, Six Sigma, continuous improvement, KPIs, like metrics themselves that can drive how leaders pursue getting results. There's different tactics and different strategies that come along with that in itself, but you can be a successful leader that can use all these things without having to push every second of someone's day.
Yep, and I've learned over the years that Gemba works well when the person running the Gemba running whatever it is you're looking at understands the process of Gemba.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't understand the process of Gemba, it's kind of a nightmare.
Well, like Gemba literally means place.
Yes.
So you're taking
the place where things happen.
Place where things happen. So you're looking at what's happening. You're looking at how this is occurring. Like, what are the processes? What are the routines? And how can you get that person to tell you, not you tell them?
Right.
Well, I actually, when I started at my current place of employment, they were talking a lot about Gemba when I first got there, and I didn't feel like anybody really understood it. So I actually printed out the definition. So I'm like, I feel like we're off base here.
Yeah.
Let's look at the, what Gemba truly means. And then there was a PowerPoint sent out by another senior leader in the building who understands the process and stuff. And so it got better.
Well, and like looking at definitions is something I want to branch off on real fast.
Yep.
Because it's going to help us more for what we're currently talking about. So when we think of the word boss, right, what immediately comes to mind?
That's someone who tells you what to do.
Okay. Nick?
There's that meme running around the internet of, like a whole bunch of people like just pulling into just a square structure, a block or something like that. And a boss is standing up on top of the block pointing,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the first thing that pops in my mind. That image is kind of ingrained in my mind. And then the leader is standing out front helping pull.
Like the Oxford definition of boss, there's three. It's a noun, a verb, or an adjective. So boss, the noun, a person who is in charge of a worker, a group, or an organization. The verb boss is giving someone orders in a domineering manner, or the boss is an adjective, excellent or outstanding. So there's positives and negatives there, but like the noun boss, they are just in charge of an organization.
I feel like the adjective is more like the Bruce Springsteen way than the leadership way.
Yeah, like
I like that.
He's the boss.
Like,
Yeah, I like that.
like boss, to me has a negative connotation. I don't like the word. I don't like when someone calls me the boss.
No, I've never liked that.
Because I don't just stand there and give orders. I like to be out there and with my team who's performing the work and seeing how it's being done. But when we look at boss, but then we're going to look at supervise or supervisor, the verb to observe and direct the execution of a task, project, or activity. To observe or direct. So frontline leader, observing or directing. More of a positive connotation here, yes? No?
Could until you get into like standard work audits.
Yeah. Yeah, you're quite literally watching someone work.
Yeah.
And you're dissecting what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's less, I don't know if it's more positive, but it's definitely less negative right off the bat.
So that's boss and manager. So or boss and supervisor, I feel like we're going in the right direction. We're looking at supervisor compared to being a boss. I don't want to be a boss. I don't desire to be a boss. I desire to be a leader. When we look at the word manager, so noun, a person responsible for controlling or administering all or part of a company or similar organization. So I think kind of the key word there is responsible for. Would you agree?
Honestly, I keyed in on the word controlling.
Okay. Nick?
I mean, I feel like responsible, yeah, because I'm responsible for the people, in my charge, as the wonderful Simon Sinek would say.
Right. Like when we think of, like, you stuck on the word controlling, we look at the word responsible for, but they do kind of go hand in hand. Like you can be one kind of manager or another, where you are ultimately responsible for the functionality or the operation of whatever unit you have currently under your charge.
Sure.
And like the other term is a person who controls the activities, business dealings, and other aspects of the career of an entertainer, athlete, group of musicians, or etc. So like a manager for like rock band,
right,
or like a model or an actor. They manage their day-to-day activities because maybe they're booked for certain things, or they have to do this and they have free rein to do that, but within these constraints.
Yeah.
So a manager manages It's almost like managing tasks in a way.
Yeah.
Yes.
To me, the way I've always thought about it, like say a supervisor or generic, I guess if you want to say leader versus like a manager. To me, a manager manages processes and things. Like to use the music manager as an example, right? They're responsible for keeping the schedule, making sure that everyone gets where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be there. Everything's in place when they get there. Everything's right. They manage that behind the scenes things, but they don't necessarily manage the band directly. The band's going to do what they want to do, but they make sure everything else is right and in place for the band.
May I put you on the spot a little bit?
Go for it.
So in your previous role before your current one, how would you define it how would you define your management of that job?
Because, you mean when my title actually was manager?
Yes. So because you managed clients. So
Correct.
how did that differ from managing people on the floor?
Well, that job was a little bit of both, and I think there always is some of that. I don't think most managers can get entirely away from managing people, but the reality is, as a client manager, my responsibility primarily was managing contracts for the company and making sure that the clients were happy. Okay. So it was exactly that. It was understanding what we were contractually obligated to provide the client. It was building relationships with that client, understanding what it is that they wanted, and making sure that we delivered to the client. That was my responsibility. The operations manager that worked with me, he was responsible primarily for the people. He was essentially that frontline leader who was responsible for making sure that the people were in place to deliver what we had promised the client we were going to deliver.
Yeah. Well, and this takes me to the last part of the manager definition. Think of like on a computer or like a sports team. The manager is put in place to make sure the organization does what it needs to do from top down. There's, like you said, everything's lined up, everything's ready, everything is set up and good to go. Like the manager of a sports team looks at the general manager or looks at the coaches for like baseball for specifics, the main coach, but then the batting coach, the pitching coach, maybe the fielding coach, all aspects of how the players perform. They get everything set up to help succeed and help mentor and develop the people that are on the field doing what they need to do. That's ultimately what the manager does. And then when we go to like retail, or we go to like warehousing or like box stores, you've got top down, the managers are pushing for let's get stuff on the counters, we got to sell stuff, but how do you lead positively without creating negativity?
Right. Essentially, the managers are setting the tone for what needs to be done to make your metrics. The leaders are responsible for making sure that the people are able to execute those goals.
Mm-hmm. So like in a distribution environment, a senior manager is going to be managing your budget and managing, hours versus productivity.
Yeah.
Are we?
And that was definitely part of my role as well, was managing the financial success of my book of business, making sure that what we were getting paid from the client was being spent properly on our side so that we were profitable.
And I think that's why where we currently work at is more of a coach versus the previous place was an operations manager, was your frontline leader, and so like I feel like a performance coach for a frontline leader is a better definition now that I've been doing it for almost 2 years. Makes more sense to me than because I'm managing the operation on my team, but I'm there to coach the people to perform better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and like when we look at the word coach, there's not even like looking at the noun, which resembles everything that's not actually what we're talking about, like a car or a horse-drawn carriage or something. Like we don't care about that kind of coach or flying coach in an airline. When we look at the actual to coach, like an athletic instructor or trainer, that's a different thing. But when we look at
kind of, right, your
similar.
Baseball coach is out there, coaching the team,
But that's a sports coach.
But I think to use your sports manager, right, your team manager analogy, I'm a Seahawks fan, right, and just think of like the general manager. And to be honest, I couldn't even tell you who that is off the top of my head anymore.
I don't know.
There's been so many changes in the organization the last few years. But I think the general manager is responsible in part for that financial success of the club, right? Making sure that they're spending their money wisely, that they have the right coaches in place, the right training staff in place, helping to make sure that they're making the right decisions for the success of the club. But the coach's role is to make sure that the people are developing and performing the way that they need to in order to make those goals. To continue with the sports metaphors and somewhat bring our conversation that we're in now back to the original topic. To me, a sports coach, football coach, baseball coach, basketball coach, doesn't really matter. They're responsible for knowing where their team is at performance-wise, and not just the team, but every player, right? They have to understand. They have to, they make their depth charts, they make their game plans. They have to know the strengths and weaknesses of their team to be able to do that, and they have to know what they need to develop so they can develop them the right way. And I think when you talk about a performance coach in a corporate world or in the workplace, it's similar, right? Nick mentioned earlier that engagement means, for him, meant getting to know his team on a personal level and building those relationships. And I think that's a huge part of engagement. If you don't know your team, you don't know their strengths and you don't know their weaknesses, how are you supposed to help them develop? How are you going to lead them into higher performance in the long term? You can't do that if you don't know your team. And so to me, I really like that coach analogy across sports and across business for people leadership, because that's really, to me, that's what our responsibility is developing our team members, maximizing their capabilities.
Yeah, and it just makes me think about one of my biggest problem performers when I got onto my team, and where that person is now. Are they perfect? No, but it's a process to improve that person and improve their performance. And now, like my mom always used to say, I wear my feelings on my sleeve, and and as a frontline leader, it's sometimes hard to hide when you're frustrated about something or when something is stressing you out. And that person will come and say, what can I do to make your day easier? How can I help you? And for that person to come and say that to me, shows that the time that I invested, getting to know them, understanding what makes them tick, how to get them to engage with work, is paying off. It's a process and it's taken time, but I can definitely see a huge change in that person's attitude and how they conduct themselves. That's a pretty rewarding thing as a leader.
Well, I think that's what brings all these definitions together to help us see the positives and the negatives in all of them, but then look at where we want to be when it comes to micromanagement versus leader engagement. We have the word boss, supervise, coach. We have manager. And then now we've got leader, which is the ultimate one that we want to be on. And when you look at the word leader, the person who leads or commands a group, organization, or a country. When we think about the word manager, the word controlling, or the word responsibility really sticks out in that definition. But here in leader, you are leading an organization, you're leading a group of people. So the responsibility comes out, yes, in the role of being a manager, but that's not all you are when it comes to being a leader.
Because leader, when I think of the word leader, I think of influence. That's the first word that pops in my brain. And you can be a second weak employee and be a leader.
Why?
Because you can influence the people around you. Hey, I noticed we do this. How come? I feel like if we stayed on this task longer, we could be more effective, because you've got a new set of eyes and you can help influence somebody that maybe is complacent. We use that word a lot when we talk about safety, but complacency, yes, is definitely a word that is involved in safety, but it's also involved in somebody I've been doing the same job for 10 years, yada, yada. And they do their job one way every day, and they might be missing something that could make them more efficient or make their job easier. Oh man, I've been fighting this for 10 years. I never looked at it that way. And this new person just showed me something, as long as they're open to that feedback. And I'm not going to, that perspective, everybody improves. So leadership really is influence.
There's so many different ways to look at how you can influence, how you can lead, how you can develop and build up, manage, supervise, direct, whatever you want to call it. But when you're leading, it doesn't matter what level of an organization you are on. Some people say leading up, some people say leading down, some people say leading across. I don't use those words ever, because if I'm leading people, I'm leading people. If I'm a peer leader, I've got a group of peers that I'm helping to do something better, or anyone in an organization can have that exact same thought process. They're helping their team be better. That influence carries up and down. It doesn't just go one way or another. And when managers say, well, I need you to lead up, they don't tell you how. They don't tell you why. They don't tell you, here's your guardrails. They just say, I need you to do this.
So let me ask you this. Let me pose a question to you.
Mm-hmm.
In your tenure as a leader, obviously it's many years longer than mine. So I'm sure you've had those supervisors that's your supervisor that's, micromanaging you, or maybe has lost that people perspective. So how do you manage your day-to-day to meet their expectations, to try to help influence them in a more positive way?
So that one's tricky. And I only use that word because when I think about a couple of leaders I've had, if the relationship is soured, I don't care about investing back in them, because there's nothing I can say or do that's going to change their style or their perspective. They're set in their ways. They believe in the micromanagement style. They believe in getting short results. They don't believe in growth.
Can I challenge that?
Yeah.
One of the bits that I've seen, an author, his name's Jocko Willink, like one of the things that he's talked about is building leadership capital. And if you've got that boss that's like, hey, I want this done this way, yada, yada. And, as the frontline leader, you push back and say, that's not very efficient, and you have your reasons, and they start to seem like they're frustrated, or you're starting to lose their favor. So at that moment, instead of pushing back more, try to execute exactly the way they want to help build that capital, right? So that next time, maybe your influence will carry a little bit farther. And that was a newer concept that I've heard recently, and one that I haven't yet figured out how to employ in my current circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's value in trying to build that relationship by building that trust, by doing what they want and then letting the results speak for themselves. If that makes sense.
And going back to what I was saying, it's tricky when you have the leader that you don't see their ability to change, but then you have the leaders that you would do anything for.
Yep.
You feel like this leader, no matter what you do for them, they have that room and an opportunity where they're going to accept what you say. They're going to accept how you give them back the criticism, whether it's constructive or it's uplifting or it's positive and it reinforces. There's those two sides of that coin that you have to balance with the leaders that you're not going to get along with and the leaders that you do get along with. You have that relationship with.
You have anything you want to add to that?
I think the only thing I guess I would add is, I think that's a really difficult position to be in when you have a leader who is a micromanager and expects you to micromanage people as well. And I think we've all been in that position at some point in our careers. I don't have the answer for how to win that person over and change their mind. And you might be right. You might be right, Robbie. It may be that they're too far gone and they're so set in their ways, excuse me, that you can't change their minds. What I've done in the past, and I won't say it necessarily worked for me, but it hasn't been terrible either, is first and foremost, I try to give them that feedback in real time if I get that directive, we're going to do this exactly this way. If it immediately throws up red flags, I'm going to bring those up and, respectfully, of course, and say, hey, I appreciate that we need to get this done and I'm aligned with doing it. Is there any wiggle room on how? Because I think that this would suit my team better. I think we'd get more buy-in. Show, just like we want to show our team that we lead, that report to us that we lead, why making a change or doing something differently benefits them, why it matters more than just make things better, just to the numbers. I think it matters when you're leading up the chain as well, right? You have to make it clear why your way might be more effective than their way. And if they don't buy in, then I agree with Nick. I think you just have to do what they want you to do in the short term to kind of get by, and then providing that feedback after the fact, like you said, right? Let the results speak for themselves when it doesn't quite go that way. And my experience has been that micromanager will invariably come back to you and say, well, that didn't work the way that I thought it was going to work. I gave you instructions. What went wrong? Mm-hmm. That's an opportunity to say, well, this, I did what you asked me to do, and this is how I did it. This is what came out as a result of that. And I think that what we can learn from this situation is whatever it was that you learned. The approach could be different. The way we talk to the people is different. Whatever it was that went wrong, whatever piece of that wasn't where it needed to be. And I may not change their mind right away, may not change their mind ever, but I think that's part of building that leadership capital that you were talking about, is showing that you're willing to give the effort the way that they want you to give it. Because at the end of the day, I think a micromanaging leader doesn't think that they're doing the wrong thing. No, they're not trying to guide you incorrectly. They're doing what they think is best for the team and the business. And, people don't want to be wrong. And so I think it's a process of showing that you're able to be a team player and do something that is supposed to be best for the business, even if you're not necessarily aligned with it being the best way to do it. And then just providing that feedback, and hopefully it gets through.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to plug a name of a thing, just because it lines up with what you said about a new leader coming in and seeing something differently and being able to help someone who's been tenured for so long doing something the same way over and over and over again. Then now there's new insights, and I can do this better and I can achieve results. The movie Moneyball. Have you seen it?
I have not, actually.
So the Athletics, back in the early 2000s, there was a thought process that had been running around baseball for a very long time about how statistics can lead the game to be better. And there was a guy that wrote this book. He had never played the sport ever in his entire life, but he watched hundreds of games, read thousands of results, and saw the way a pitcher pitched, the percentage of a strike, the percentage of a swing and a miss, the percentage of a ball, contact, all that. He looked at all these numbers and he drove formulas and he drove statistics based off of it. And the coach of the Athletics was trying to rebuild his team because he lost 3 key players the prior year and he was trying to replace them. He ran into this person that believed in the statistics that were being provided via the thought process of this man that wrote the book. The leader pulls in that statistical analyzer, that analytical ball player, brought him into his club. And this is where micromanagement kind of came into play, where he said, this is how we're going to do it. Get on board or leave. But then what ultimately happened was he was showing everybody that it doesn't matter how you play a ball. You can't play off of one thought process or one strategy. You got to play to the strengths of the players themselves.
Perfect.
And he had a lot of conversations that were negative with his coach. He was a general manager. The coach managed the team.
Yeah.
And the coach would not follow suit with what the manager was saying. This is how we're going to play baseball. So to prevent the coach from fighting off of him, he was taking the players off the team that weren't giving way to the strategy. And then the team started to perform better because they were playing how the team was designed, how they were supposed to play based off their strengths and not a single way of playing baseball. And ultimately, it got them to the playoffs that year. It got them pretty close to the World Series. Yeah, they fell short because in the end, they were against a better team. But they showed that you don't need just one kind of way to play baseball. There's all these different ways to play.
I've got another story that's kind of similar to that. And I'm not sure how much this necessarily pertains to, excuse me, to our conversation. But It reminded me of, are you familiar with Rick Barry?
Yes.
He was a basketball player. He played 14 seasons in the ABA and the NBA. And as far as I'm aware, to this day, he's still the number 7th ranked all-time free throw shooter with an average 89.3% across his 14 years playing professional ball. Most players average around 50% at the free throw line.
Yeah.
So that's pretty impressive. What he did differently is that he switched to shooting his free throws underhand, if you will. Most people might say granny style, right? Instead of overhand like everyone else, you shoot down from his hips or his knees up. And it worked. And physicists have studied the game, and they've shown that is a more favorable arc for getting into the basket from the free throw line, is to shoot from down low rather than up top. But nobody does that in the NBA.
No.
I don't know when you've ever watched a professional game and seen anybody do that these days. It's not a thing, but it's been proven. It's been proven time and time again that it's a more accurate way to shoot free throws, but nobody will do it. And other players who've been asked why they don't do it, his teammates didn't do it either when he was playing, and they didn't do it because that's how girls shoot. That's not how men play basketball. And so that idea, right, you're talking about statistics, how they can impact performance, is absolutely true, right? There are statistics out there that show that is a better way to play basketball. That all these games that you have been lost by just a few points could have been won on free throws if the players were just willing to play that way instead of shooting free throws overhand.
Mm-hmm.
But they won't, because it doesn't look good the way that shooting free throws looks now. And I think, I don't want to be harsh, but I think that's a leadership issue in the NBA. If you ask me, that's an example of people who know they can do better and are refusing to do better.
Yeah, they're making the conscious decision not to do that.
Yeah, and to your point, right? Like, there's more than one way to play the game, but this is a proven better way to play the game.
Yeah.
And there are coaches all over the world who are letting their players play poorly rather than lead them into doing something a better way. And I don't know why, right? I don't have the inside track. I don't know what the decision is there. Maybe it's not enough they don't feel like it's enough to make a difference. Maybe it's a big enough issue in that they would lose all their players if they pushed it. Like, I don't know, right? I don't have the answers there, but like, it's an interesting thing to think about.
Well, and like when we take that, we look at like leading and helping an organization to change and to grow and to foster different thought processes. It takes us right into leader engagement, like our next bullet point, if you want to carry us forward.
Yeah, and using that statistics as a caveat into my next story, as when I was an hourly team member and I was kind of a peer leader, I was the department trainer. I was an influential person on the team. I had built good relationships with my peers and those kinds of things. We were changing a process called GPMing. I'm not going to get into that, what the process is, but it's a non-production function.
Mm-hmm.
And so management is trying to look at how do we minimize hours and maximize productivity so that it's easier to pay for that function, right? And so they came out with a pretty drastic change in staffing on how we were going to staff that function to still maintain serviceability to the building, but save hours. The more people you have in a prod function, the easier it is to pay for those non-prod functions.
Mm-hmm.
And the team instantly pushed back. It was like, we've always done it this way. You can't, this is a stupid change, yada, yada, all that inherent negativity that comes out right off the bat from tenured team members that, truly are the experts, right? For the process of how it's been done for the last however many years. My pushback to my peers was, if we don't try and give it an honest effort, then we don't have the data to say whether it does or doesn't work, because we might learn something. At the end of the day, we might learn something.
Mm-hmm.
Or we're going to show like why this is a bad idea, and maybe this low number isn't going to work, but we can compromise by, taking a couple out of the equation and find that sweet spot, right? But that was how I got buy-in from my peers to give it a shot, to try, to show what we could do. Now, a lot of tenured people will say, oh, that's how they just you show them you can do it and they're just going to keep expecting more. Well, maybe, but it forces you to look at it differently. It forces you to change your perspective. And if you don't have data to go off of, if you don't have statistics to go off of, then you're never going to know whether something is going to work or not. But with statistics, you have to understand what those statistics are saying.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have somebody that's looking at numbers and don't fully understand what those numbers mean, it can go drastically wrong. But anyway, so that's getting back to micromanagement. Like, what are some pitfalls of micromanagement? Like, what are some characteristics? So like an over involvement in every task. Boy, howdy, that pops me right back to standard work audits.
Mm-hmm.
Standard work audits can be effective when you are looking at somebody that is not meeting metrics that you're putting out and you're trying to help them improve. So you need to watch what they're doing so you can help them be better. But that premise has to be there before that. That conversation has to be had before you start doing it. Like, I'm not here to beat you down. I want to help you improve, but I have to understand your process so that I can help you make some improvements. And that's how I tried to approach standard work audits, and not just, well, you suck, because there's very much a stigma about the idea of a standard work audit. But you want to talk about maybe how over involvement kind of leads to a lack of trust.
So when you look at leader engagement, leaders, their biggest power is the trust that their teams have in them and that they have back in their team to be able to achieve the job. I've set this groundwork. I trust that you can do it to this level. And if I need to help you get better, I can do so. But micromanagers lack the ability to see that they are going to achieve this task. I need to make sure it's achieved the way I want it done every single time to the letter. And it goes back to what I said about stress, anxiety, not feeling like they belong in the organization, not feeling like they're empowered, not feeling like they're benefiting anything because they're so engrossed in the failure. They're not engrossed in the outcome of the positive nature that shows growth.
Yeah.
Micromanagers don't see growth potential. They see pitfalls and they're stuck in that thought process. Whereas when you're a leader, you're seeing the potential for someone to grow, someone to improve, and someone to do better. And you're focused on the positives. Whereas recognition, you will never get recognition from a micromanager unless you hit their result in their specific number.
Back to my point, like if you are not setting that tone and you're just doing 2 standard work audits a day on one person, you are robbing them of feeling valued.
Yep.
But if you're setting that premise of, I'm here to help, and I want to help you improve because I want to see you succeed. Because if you improve here, then we can get you to doing this function, and then you do well here, then we can continue to move up into more favorable jobs. Because there's an end goal, right? There's a reward. So I don't have to do that job function every day. If I do well, I can do this other thing that's more desirable.
And if I can master the key components that make me successful in the entry-level position, those skills carry me to the next position. It'll teach me something else. And I can compound my benefits from both of those and go on to the next step. And maybe I'm not good in the environment that's industry-wide of having like certain standard processes or certain routines. Maybe I'm not good at this, but I'm very good at this. Well, over time, you'll learn that your team can succeed in maybe processing out items. They're really good inventory controllers. They're not good at physicalities when it comes to like moving product. They're not material handlers. They're inventory controllers. So you can separate that out, and you can have your specialists that can be beneficial in this area or this area.
Because you are focused on the minute. You're not focused on the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
I also think this conversation you guys are having right now has pulled together a couple of things we've talked about earlier in the show as well. Early on, Nick, you mentioned the concept of decision rights in our current workplace. For those who don't know, Nick and I work in the same place, and we have similar job experience. We have worked together before this role. One key component of decision rights that I learned is that decision rights are not assigned by title. Decision rights belong to the person who is in the best position to make that decision, who has the most knowledge, who maybe has the most experience, or maybe has the freshest outlook, if that's what you're looking for, right? You have to decide what criteria it is you want somebody who's going to make that decision to meet, and the person who meets that criteria, that's your decision. That's the person who has the decision rights, not the boss, the manager, the leader. Necessarily, it could be an hourly person on the floor. It could be someone who's brand new, depending on what it is you're looking for, what kind of decision you want somebody to make. And I think what I like about that is that it embraces the fact that we don't all work the same way, and not just day to day how I perform this task, but we don't all think the same way. We don't all have the same strengths and the same weaknesses. And so decision rights don't belong to that person who has the title. They belong to the person who's in the best position to make that decision. But that also connects to like these standard work audits, right? Yeah. I understand that in that environment, when I was in that similar role, we didn't do those. But I understand that there are certain things that you kind of have to be able to do to be successful in that role and to make production. But on the other side of that is that not everyone has those strengths, but they might be able to make their production with a little bit of a modification.
Yep.
And that difference between micromanagement and leading to me is in this example, right, is that you give the decision rights on how you're going to do the job to the person doing it, because they know, in theory, if you're empowering them and you're giving them the tools they need, they can make the decision on how to get there the best for themselves and how they work. So rather than micromanaging them, telling them you're going to do A, B, C, then D in that order, and if you don't do it and you don't do it fast enough, then we're going to be having another conversation like a micromanager might do. A leader would say, hey, here's our goal for the day. This is what we need to get done. I believe in you. I know you can do it. If you need anything from me, I'm here to support you.
Yep. And it might be setting expectations like, we talk a lot about quality in my current role, so like, I want you to be at this production goal, but it's more important to make sure that you're doing a quality check at these intervals, because if your production might drop a little bit here and there, but I can explain that because you're doing everything that you can, maybe in a short staff situation, right? Or I had to back off here because I wanted to make sure I was making this quality product, yada, yada. Like, great. Perfect. So you're empowering them like to make the right decisions, and trusting that they're going to do that.
I also think it doesn't assume that I'm the person who knows best.
Yes.
Right. That's the other thing. This role that I'm in currently, for those who don't know, is manufacturing. And this is the first place I've ever worked in my career that's a manufacturing environment. And so I came into this role straight into frontline leadership. And I had never worked in an environment like this before. I don't know how these machines work. I don't know the processes from day one, but my responsibility now is to lead these people into being effective at what they do. And the only way to do that is to let them do what they do best and be there to support them, because I can't go down on the floor and I can't go out there and say, well, you need to change this and that. I don't know, but they do. Yep. They have the experience.
So I think what we're going to do right now is we've had a really good conversation about digging into defining what leadership is, defining what engagement versus micromanagement is. Before we go further, let's have everyone just reflect on what we've covered, from change management to empowerment to looking at like leading through different skills. We'll come back to a couple of those in our next part for this, but just everyone want you to look forward to our next conversation about this because there's more to come.
Yeah, I apologize for getting too in the weeds here a few times.
It's good though.
Yeah,
I like the conversation.
Yeah. So everyone, thank you for tuning in for this episode, and we'll catch you on our next one for more about leader engagement versus micromanagement here on the Leadership Journal as we cover more of our journey. Signing off.
Thank you.